Hi, my name is Joanna Whitney. I am an intuitive artist, a student of natural law, and an energy healer. And we're currently discussing this book called The Kybalion by the Three Initiates. And I've taken a break for a couple of weeks because we got to the chapters called The Divine Paradox about absolute truth and relative truth. And I really felt like it would be so easy to misunderstand that chapter if you were coming from where we're at now in 2024 versus where they were at when they wrote it in 1908. And so I was delving into the podcasts of Mark Passio from number one, the early podcasts where he talks about solipsism. Last week, that's the notes that I was taking was from his first podcast. And I'm still going to be using those podcasts in this work right now because I think it's very relevant to where we're at. I don't think people were under the most extreme mind control in 1908. I mean, they were under some mind control because they largely trusted the government at that time. And things happened that proves that, where they gave up their gold. And then in 1933, the Federal Reserve was formed. So they did trust their government. But they weren't under the type of mind control we are under now. And so when they wrote this book, they understood that relative truth is married to absolute truth, whereas today, nihilism is being perpetrated upon us. And we've lost critical thinking, and we've lost our spiritual nature. We've lost the ability to have common sense. We don't have common sense anymore. And the destruction of society is in full swing. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on looking at breaking this down so that we can have a true, real experience with this book. And it's not just another study where you come away with it without any new information. So I'm going to just follow my notes and see how it goes. So I said here, based on what we were talking about last week, where I took the liberty to talk about solipsism in relation to the chapter written in 1908 and how things have changed for people and how we think since how people thought back then, I'm going to take another week to consider the divine paradox and what makes up absolute truth versus relative truth. I said last week that relative truth has been degraded to a great degree, so much so that if we just rely upon our perceptions to know truth, which is what has actually occurred, it is unlikely that we're going to be able to use these principles at all. If knowing the self, written on the Oracle of Delphi, quote, heed these words, you who wish to probe the depths of nature. If you do not find within yourself that which you seek, neither will you find it outside yourself. If you ignore the wonders of your own house, how do you expect to find other wonders? In you is hidden the treasure of treasures. Know thyself, and you will know the universe and the gods. So then what does it mean to know the self? What does it mean? What is your own house? What is the treasure of treasures? Is it the body? Is it the mind? Is it the spirit? What is mind? Is it the brain? Is it consciousness? Are all these things part of the law of mentalism and understanding absolute truth and relative truth? We said that the first law of the 7 is the law of mentalism. And to be honest, what is the law of mentalism? What is mentalism? Mark says, the principle of mentalism is simply that everything that exists first as a mental construct. The mind is the essential generator of everything that we experience in the universe, and that which we experience comes into being as a result of how we think. Our experience will be dictated by how we think as a man and a woman thinks, so they will be. But I believe there's more to it than that, honestly. But that's a good basis. That's a good basis for it to begin with. And if our brain is unbalanced due to mind control, how will our attempt to understand this material actually really work? The principle of mentalism explains the true nature of energy, power, and matter, and why and how all these are subordinate to the mastery of the mind. So what is the mind? So I am reviewing Mark Passio's work along with the Kybalion study because I feel there are some very important things that I left out when I began the Kybalion study and when I arrived at chapter 6, the divine paradox, when I realized that I had to take a pause before moving forward. First of all, last week, I talked about the biggest lie, solipsism, and how that is being perpetrated upon us. That information came from What on Earth is Happening, podcast number 1. And I feel an even stronger responsibility now to delve more deeply into the law of mentalism in light of Mark's work before I go on, because it will affect how people experience the law of mentalism if they do not understand the human brain, consciousness, mind control, etc. And start to take hold of this for themselves before trying to understand the Kybalion. If you have an unbalanced mind-controlled brain, how are you going to even understand the law of mentalism? You could easily twist it to fit your skewed worldview. So again, this week, I'm going to pause and review more about the brain based on these early podcasts, and I'm going to be quoting him in this class, reading directly from transcripts of his work, which I feel are directly related to these topics. For example, know thyself means that we understand how our brains work. And I'm not sure I'm going to get to that today, but I'm going to get to the prerequisites of that. So self-examination above all else. The more knowledge we have about how we work and why we fundamentally believe the things that we do and why we fundamentally behave in the ways that we do, until we have enough information about that, are we really in a position to start affecting things for the better and moving towards solutions? There does have to come knowledge first. Otherwise, we'd be running around like chickens with our heads cut off, not really knowing what's going on, not really knowing what's going on within us, more importantly. So let's further break down some of these ideas and get into what human consciousness really is about. We have a threefold nature to our consciousness. Consciousness is part of the law of mentalism, most definitely. Consciousness will affect how we view the divine paradox, absolutely. Consciousness is in the absolute truth and in relative truth. So therefore, consciousness is really the solution to the problems that we face. It's the solution for not being deceived anymore. It's the solution for not being able to be externally controlled by other people and or whatever they are anymore. Consciousness is the solution to ultimately all the problems that we face as a species. because if we don't have consciousness, then we wander in the dark. We are wandering in base levels of awareness. You never really know the difference between truth and falsehood if you're at a low vibrational consciousness. Somebody can come along with any lie or any made up notion, and they can hold it out there as bait, and you'd be willing to bite it and buy it. You know, that's kind of what happened. This podcast, I believe, was put forth in 2010 for 20 years or 10 years before that actually happened. Again, it has been said, are we really being sold the lies we're living? Were we really sold them, or did we buy them willingly? That's a question we really need to ask ourselves. Were we so hungry for someone to take responsibility for us, for someone to think for us, for someone to solve problems for us, that we were willing to lay aside our personal responsibility, and most of all, our responsibility to understand the truth, which is what is really going on in the world, the truth, what has actually occurred. Were we willing to lay that aside and just say, okay, I'll take your solution. All you have to do is put it out there, and I accept it. I'll buy it. I think the latter is certainly the case, that we really weren't sold the mess we're in. We bought it hook, line, and sinker. And the only way to really get out of that modality of being in the world is to raise consciousness. That's what the solution ultimately is. Every problem contains in itself the seed of its own solution. That is a huge principle that you should write down and contemplate. That seed is human consciousness. So we have a problem here, a lack of consciousness, and that problem contains in itself the seed of its own solution, and that's consciousness. So what is consciousness? The definition that I'm going to use is that it's our ability to recognize patterns that are going on with respect to the events that are taking place around us, and not just around us, but also inside of us. The internal patterns that take place within the body, within the mind, within our feelings. That's what consciousness is about. Being able to recognize patterns and meaning. What do those patterns mean? Not just that they are there, but why are they there? The question why has to be addressed all the time. That's what consciousness really is. It's looking at something and it's asking the question why. Why is it like this? Why is this a fundamental nature of this thing or this problem or this event? That's curiosity. So consciousness is our ability to recognize patterns and meaning with respect to the events that are taking place both within us and around us. And consciousness can either be raised through knowledge or it can be manipulated through knowledge. And that's what we really have to get into when we consider the law of mentalism, and when we are attempting to consider the divine paradox of absolute truth and relative truth. I'm going to talk about mind control and its methodologies, because if someone doesn't understand the methodologies of mind control, they don't really have the tools to understand the ways that they may be actively being manipulated by other people who do not have their best interests at heart. There are so many different methodologies of it, and I'm talking about mass mind control. There's something called trauma-based mind control as well. Mind control that goes to work on large populations of people based on programming into them the fundamental axioms or core belief systems that people fundamentally take as true and then act upon as if they are true. We have to be aware of how it works if we are planning on utilizing the law of mentalism and other laws in the Kybalion so that we don't make stuff up based upon limiting beliefs and on other people's false ideas that have been imparted to us. Let's take NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, for example, which is about word choice and speech patterns related to embedding ideas in people's consciousness so that they act in certain ways. The use of symbolism for mind control. Symbolism is an archetypal language. It is in language that if we don't understand the building blocks of and the syntax of, then we are completely vulnerable to its manipulation at a subconscious level. We need to consider frequency, the use of colors and the use of shapes and forms, and how all of these come together in a cohesive way and are used to influence the thoughts and ultimately used as a mechanism to subvert consciousness and control it. It really is more than mind control. It's consciousness control. That's what the human species is basically under. It is the manipulation and control of the three experiential forms of human consciousness. Consciousness has essentially two seemingly opposite qualities, however, they are not opposites. They are really unified and they dance with each other, is a good way to look at it. They're actually embracing each other and they form the quality of the whole consciousness. There is an internal and indwelling feminine manifestation, and there is an external masculine manifestation of consciousness. Now, different spiritual systems have different names for these. And so just take yin and yang, for example. Yin is the internal feminine. It's a passive quality. It's an intuitive quality. It is a more compassionate or submissive quality, and it is associated with the right brain. The right brain hemisphere largely carries this energy, the yin quality. Now you have the external male quality of consciousness, and that would be called the yang quality. This would be the more dominant or analytical, the logical side. This would be a male element, and it would be more associated with the left brain hemisphere. It is an active quality. It's logical and analytical, and it is dominant. This is all about how we make our consciousness manifest to others through our actions. You've heard the saying, you will know them by their actions. And that is certainly true. We have to strive, if we want to become more conscious, to bring these two qualities into unison and balance with each other within ourselves. So we have to strive to become beings that as we think and as we feel, so we take action. And that our actions aren't in contradiction or opposition with how we really feel inside. So if I feel something is wrong, is not morally correct, or is not morally justifiable, and I do it anyway, for whatever reason, the reason doesn't matter, then I'm in opposition with myself. And I could be in opposition not only with my little self, but with my higher self. Justifications or excuses do not hold any water. That's all they are, is justifications and excuses. If we continue to take actions that we actually believe aren't morally justified, that we really should not be doing, and we know that deep down inside, then we are in a state of internal opposition with ourselves, with our own consciousness. And for that very reason, that is why we are experiencing the negative and uncomfortable and often painful situations that we are experiencing in the world today, because we are in a state of internal opposition with ourselves. You know, what you could do is you could take a daily inventory and look at how you were throughout the day, every evening before bed. You could review all the circumstances that you were in and ask yourself if your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions were congruent, and just check off how many times you were in conflict. That would be a very helpful thing to do in the beginning stages of making changes. Because the thing is if that's the case, how skewed is your relative truth going to be? Meaning that if I'm just living in constant opposition with myself, my relative truth is going to be conflicted and constantly seeking a distraction, or maybe I'm blaming other people, my circumstances, or the world or something for my internal conflict that's being caused by my actions not being congruent with my feelings and my thoughts. We have to strive to make these two qualities into one within us, and there's many different methodologies for doing that, which we will get into eventually. But for now, it is important just to look at this. How are we going to use this book, the Kybalion, if we are not living in alignment with ourselves morally? There is a solution for every problem that is out there. There really is a solution, and there's a formula for problem solving, and that's what we're ultimately looking for. We're really striving to find the solution to this problem. You can know all you want about the problem. You can learn more and more and more about the chains that you're held in. But ultimately, if you're not looking for a way out of those chains, then what is the difference? What you know about the chains. It is a first step that you do have to understand how the problems manifest. We ultimately have to strive for solutions, and the way we get down to that problem solving is by finding enough information about the ultimate nature, the core nature of the problem. And the core nature of the problem that we face is that we do not ultimately know ourselves. We do not ultimately know enough about human consciousness and the way it works. And that is a manipulator's dream scenario. If you have a person or a group of people who do not really understand how they work, they don't understand how their minds work, they don't really understand how their emotional makeup works, maybe they're not a very emotionally developed person, then you're in a position to completely manipulate and control their behavior because you know more about their makeup and how they work than they do. Again, understanding this, how can we really move forward past this spot, looking at containing the two concepts of absolute truth and relative truth? If we do not understand ourselves, how can we know how to interpret our perceptions if we are under mind control or acting in opposition to our own conscious? Natural law is simply how the system that we're in does work. Whether we believe it, accept it, or not, there are laws that bind this place, and we are inextricably bound to it and by it. And if we break those laws, we suffer, and if we harmonize with them, we don't suffer. Self-knowledge is what we need. We need consciousness, the ability to recognize patterns of information, the ability to recognize what is taking place both within us and around us in the external reality that we experience and share with others. So consciousness at its core has a dual nature, or internal feminine qualities and external masculine qualities. How this manifests in each individual unit of consciousness. I'm going to get more in depth about this so that we can individually understand better what relative truth really is outside of mind control. And we can really start to get prepared to really meet this chapter of the divine paradox head on, because at some point I'm going to move ahead in reading the rest of this book, but not before I have laid what I feel is necessary out for people to start to understand about an upgraded version of relative truth as it is the child of absolute truth. It's not its own thing. It's actually paired with absolute truth. But we have individual work to do about that by clearing away the mind control and the trauma that is presently informing our thoughts, our emotions, and therefore our actions, or maybe more likely our present inaction. So I'm going to continue that next week.